Welcome to the CEC Report for June the 6th. I'm Elisa Barwick, and with me in the studio is Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Elisa. Before we continue, I just wanted to note two things. Today is the 70th anniversary of D-Day, which was the big pushback against the Nazis. That's definitely worth commemorating. Also, Lisa, I want to pay tribute to somebody. Craig hasn't been here for a few weeks because his father passed away, and his father, John, was a very good supporter of the CEC for a long time. And in fact, he built this studio we sit in. So by virtue of that, we should pay tribute to John.
Absolutely. He'll be missed, but his legacy continues. Now, today in the CEC Report, we're going to discuss Australia must join new alliances for economic development and time to send some bankers to jail. How the Pecora Commission put Wall Street in a straitjacket. Now, the world is truly at a breaking point, and this is verified by the fact that there are two very distinct tendencies occurring across the globe, both of which are escalating dramatically. One, on the good side, is the tendency to dump the current economic system, or on the other side, to escalate dramatically the looting of people with Bailin and with austerity policies, and of course these policies, as we've documented, kill. Now,
and that's to keep the current system going.
Exactly, to try to, which won't succeed. Now, firstly, there's been a revolt across Europe in the elections for the European Parliament, where a lot of small parties in countries like Britain, Greece, France and Ireland doubled, or even some of them quadrupled their votes, taking over large numbers of their nation's seats in the European Parliament. Now, leaders of these parties, whether from the left or right, have called for their nations to exit the Eurozone and have also called for Glass-Steagall.
And Lisa, what they have in common, what unifies all these different people voting in all these countries for these alternative parties, is they are sick of the model of being dictated to by the European Union. They're voting in the European parliamentary elections against the concept of the European system.
Exactly,
right.
Which is an interesting paradox. So there's serious discussion, particularly in France and even in Britain, about leaving the euro, and in Britain there's discussion about a referendum maybe occurring. So that's the revolt in Europe. Now, across Eurasia, you also have a series of stunning developments in the last week or so. On ending the 22nd May, there was a Shanghai summit between President Putin of Russia and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, which discussed, it was signed actually, 46 major accords, and discussed in particular two things: the integration between China's proposal for the Silk Road economic belt and also Putin's Eurasian Economic Union. And the second thing that it signed on to was reform for the global financial system in accordance with the needs of the real economy, so dumping the current monetarist system. Now, that was followed by a conference on interaction and confidence building measures in Asia on 21st May, where 47 nations and organisations called for creating a new security architecture in Asia proposed by the Chinese president, who said we need a new mode of thinking where security is based not on acting against a third party, but based on collaboration. You had the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the 22nd to 24th May, which, as one journalist put it, heralded the birth of a new Eurasian century, and they talked also about integrating Russia and China's development. Then the establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union occurred on the 29th May, which was described by the Kazakhstan president. This is between Russia, Kazakhstan and Belarus, an area encompassing 170 million people.
Which was supposed to have Ukraine in it too.
Yeah, that was the proposal. And the Kazakh president said, "We see this as an open space and a new bridge between the growing economies of Europe and Asia." And in this same period, Lyndon LaRouche sent greetings to a major international scientific conference that occurred in Russia.
And Elisa, the hallmark of these agreements is a real focus on physical economic development, not airy-fairy free trade deals that are designed to let multinational corporations just pick off the industries in country after country, right, enforced by the US and British militaries. Real collaboration around economic development. In fact, Bob Hawke and John Howard did a joint appearance at the National Press Club this week, and and both of these guys are, just absolute sellouts to the neoconservative agenda run out of Washington. Bob Hawke noted with a kind of alarm, he didn't want to be that dramatic about it, he noted that he said, people talk about Obama's pivot to Asia. He said the real pivot to Asia is by Russia, and he mentioned this deal that Putin and the Chinese president signed, which is the single biggest trade deal in the history of the world. And there's a bit of alarm about this, but there shouldn't be, because this is real economic development they're making agreements on, and this is allowing Eurasia to actually build up physical wealth in this part of the world, which is the only thing balancing the destruction of physical wealth in the transatlantic part of the world in countries like Australia where the free trade system's running riot.
And China and Russia are not intent on excluding anyone. I mean, the Chinese Prime Minister went to Africa on 8th May at the World Economic Forum for Africa in Nigeria. He said, look, we want to help you build rail connecting all African capital cities, high-speed rail. We'll provide the financing with no strings attached. So they're looking at this as uplifting the entire world. Now, this is urgent because what we're seeing is that we're on the edge of a new financial blowout. A report just came out from the Bank of International Settlements saying that most of the world's major banks now have 20 to 30% more global derivatives exposure than what they had in 2007, 2008 at the point of the crash. Some of the individual banks like Citibank were as high as 65% increase. The Australian banks in totality, who had 13 trillion back in the crash, now have 23 trillion, an increase of nearly 77%.
That's the worst increase in the world.
Exactly. So now the option of Bailin is about to be invoked, and a senior economist of the French Socialist Party, Jacques Attali, stated May 26 that the worst financial crisis in generations will hit in 2015. And he said savers will watch their savings being plundered, not by inflation, but by a drain on their bank accounts, as in Cyprus, which, he said, the recent agreements on the banking union explicitly allow and are known as bail-ins, though few people know about it. And in fact, just in this past period, an Austrian bank, Hypo Alde Adria, has been ordered to default against $2 billion in unsecured creditors by the Austrian government. And not only did Moody's downgrade the bank, but the sovereign debt of Austria as well. But this proposal of Bailin, I should say, came up at the G20 event on the 11th of April in Washington, which was attended by Joe Hockey.
Well, chaired by Joe Hockey.
Chaired by Joe Hockey, exactly. And there's a whole set of financial reforms that has been laid out by the G20, agreed to at various G20 meetings. And basically the report that was handed down by Joe Hockey included a subsection by the head of the Financial Stability Board, the Bank for International Settlements body in charge of getting through this suite of reforms, which includes bail-in. And those financial reforms were delivered by Joe Hockey and basically stated that we are on track to deliver bail-in as a global measure where all nations that are part of the G20 are on board with that by the Brisbane G20 Leaders Summit in 2014. So how can Joe Hockey claim that there's no bail-in laws in train in Australia if he's just handed down this report by Carney saying, oh, it's all on track to happen?
Yeah, because we're still getting letters from members of Parliament who've responded to the public, and they've forwarded these concerns to Joe Hockey because, from our information, the public has said, well, we don't want a law here where your bank deposits can be stolen to prop up failing banks. So Hockey's office just keeps reeling out the same reply, which is, no, nothing like that's planned for Australia. And they don't even, use the term bail-in, really, right? They just avoid the language. Yet it's so advanced, we know it, we've documented all the evidence. And every time Joe Hockey goes overseas and participates in these G20 events, that's all it's about, bail-in. And they use, when bail-in first came to people's attention, Lisa, it was after the Cyprus episode where people's bank accounts were stolen. They've kind of changed the language since then, but we know that's still the same intention. But there has been a PR exercise to wind back the language, and so they use terms like bail-inable bonds, bail-in debt. Well, bail-in debt still all comes under the category of what we're talking about. It's debt to unsecured creditors, which includes depositors. And so they're lying through their teeth, and this is still a live issue, and we're still the ones fighting it.
And after the break, we're going to talk about how Australia should respond to this. Welcome back. Time to send some bankers to jail. How the Pecora Commission put Wall Street in a straitjacket. Now, something to announce before we get into the guts of what happened with the Pecora Commission. This week, the executive of the Australian Local Government Association, ALGA, blocked a motion which called for Glass-Steagall, which was to be on the table for the 14th to 16th of June National
General Assembly.
Now, many councillors were very shocked about this. One even said they always put the motions up unless it doesn't meet the criteria, and this certainly did meet the criteria. Now, what I want you to talk a bit about is what happened in 2007 and 8 with councillors that we're trying to, or councils and other institutions.
Yeah, well Glass-Steagall, a motion debating the importance of Glass-Steagall is right up their alley because of all the sectors of Australia, local government were clearly victims of the worst aspects of the financial system leading up to 2007 and 2008. They were preyed upon. I did a segment on this show a couple of weeks ago with Glenn Isham where we went through the details, and people can look at that on our YouTube site. But these councils were set up. They were under state government auspices, etc. They had officially recommended to them Grange Securities, which was owned by Lehman Brothers, and Grange Securities. Now there are regulations on what councils can invest in. It's got to be gilt-edged, right? You know, i.e. AAA rated. So Grange Securities paid Standard & Poor's to put AAA ratings on crap, right? Worthless collateralised debt obligations based on subprime mortgages in America to get around those regulations. A lot of councils in New South Wales and WA bought them, and they lost millions, absolutely millions. So they were set up, and the point is, under a Glass-Steagall system, where there's a total separation of investment banking, which is what Lehman Brothers and that comes under, and real banking, right, which is putting your deposits in the bank. At the end of the day, the council should be concerned about one thing, the security of ratepayers' money, right, not putting it in a casino. So under a Glass-Steagall system, councils would come under the protected side and never be able to have anything to do with that other side, right? So this is a no-brainer. This is the ultimate no-brainer, yet ALGA has blocked it. And the question we've posed is, given that there were interests involved in the local government, state government bureaucracies back then that helped set them up, are those same vested interests playing the role in blocking this motion?
Exactly. And what you said about Glass-Steagall is crucial because there's discussion about all sorts of regulations that are just short of Glass-Steagall, like ring fencing in Britain and so forth. Yeah. And in the House of Lords debate at the end of last year, one of the Lords said that these banks are very adept at getting between the wall and the wallpaper. And he was a former investment banker. And I raise this because after the 1929 crash, and the advent of the Pecora Commission, which was the commission to investigate and hunt down the devil in the detail of what had caused that crash, it became obvious that although there had been regulations prior to Glass-Steagall coming in, which came in as a result of the Pecora Commission, those regulations were not enough to keep
the banks just got around them.
Exactly. And one of the things that Ferdinand Pecora said, he was questioning the head of Citibank, or National City it was called, which was the largest bank in the world. And in that course of that questioning, he charged that the securities affiliates of National City was a huge or a gigantic foolproof device for gambling freely with the stockholders' money, taking huge profits when the gambles won and risking not a penny of their own money if they lost. So essentially they were suckering in the average men and women, which I would ask, what's different today? But what I wanted you to talk a bit about is what were the sorts of things that Pecora investigated and what were the crimes that sent bankers to jail?
Well, the information is contained in this really great book, which I highly recommend, The Hellhound of Wall Street, How Ferdinand Pecora's Investigation of the Great Crash Forever Changed American Finance. And this was written by Michael Perino in 2009. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty confident that Perino was motivated to write this book because of the 2008 global financial crisis. Because, of course, since then, which was a bigger crash than in different ways, the total amount of money was a bigger crash. Because of that, we've had no holding to account Wall Street. Globally, Wall Street, London, these banks that preyed on the Australian councils, they've been held to account in civil court. In fact, Elisa, the ABN AMRO appealed a civil judgment against it in Australia, and that appeal will be decided today. So we don't know the results of that yet. But there've been no criminal, there's been no criminal charges against anybody, any of these players. So Pecora, though, was a different kettle of fish. Here's the deal. Just bear with me. I've got my notes here. Okay. So this was 10 days in 1933, and it was the investigation took place in the 10 days before Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated. He'd been elected in 1932. They'd had this congressional inquiry going for years, actually, and it got nowhere. And then providentially, a new lawyer was given the job at very low pay of continuing the investigation for the few weeks it had left in this parliamentary congressional committee, and it was this guy, and he was the right man for the job at the right time. And what he did was he showed something up, and this is the main point, and we'll go through the details probably after the break, but the main point of what he did was he ripped the mask off Wall Street. Now, I think that's important because there's a lot. We've been talking to council victims of Wall Street here in Australia. They still haven't been able to see behind the mask. They think these were our investments gone bad. You win some, you lose some. No. Very few people are prepared to say what we say, which is this was deliberate criminal fraud. In 1933, Elisa, 3.5 years after the 1929 stock market crash, when it all came crashing down, in that time, something like 5,000 banks had collapsed in the United States. Bankers were still revered as honourable men. And for that reason, they were still unregulated because their honour was enough, right? And nothing had been done to clear up this mess for 3.5 years. The crash had happened 3.5 years earlier. And then these 10 days of investigation happened, and he ripped the mask right off them, and the results were stunning.
In incredible detail in 10 days. We're going to continue after this short break. Welcome back. We're discussing time to send some bankers to jail, how the Pecora Commission put Wall Street in a straitjacket.
All right, so Lisa, as I was saying, from this book, The Hellhound of Wall Street, Wall Street, the crash had happened in 1929, 3.5 years earlier. Nothing had been done. The bankers were revered. And so Ferdinand Pecora got the job as the legal counsel to this congressional committee, and he did some homework, and he started getting these bankers in to question them in this official committee. What he showed is that in the unregulated environment that they existed in, these bankers, they were bigger thieves than Al Capone. And that's the way the media characterised it, because everyone knew about Al Capone, Elliot Ness, that was all the big news of the day, right? And then all of a sudden Wall Street was shown to be worse. The main bank was Citibank, which is the Citibank of today. Back then it was known as National City Bank, and it had an investment arm called National City Company, right? And as you were saying in the previous segment, there were rules against that was supposed to keep the two divisions separate. The equivalent of ring fencing in Britain today, meaningless, right? National City. This example proves you need a full, total, complete separation. Citibank was the biggest bank in the world. It was worth over $1 billion at the time of the crash. The guy who headed it, his name was Charles Mitchell, and his nickname was Sunshine Charlie, and he was the world's greatest bond salesman, they called him. And he had this, he seemed to be egalitarian because he put the bank on this program of allowing people to open accounts with $1, which was a tiny, like no other bank did that. And what they did is they just increased their customer base like mad, but they did it for a reason, because everybody who had an account with National City Bank, their names were given to the salesman at National City Company to be sold securities. The securities they mostly sold was actually stock in National City Bank, right? Now, that became sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where, you know, oh, this is a great stock, it's going up. Yeah, because our own bank is making it go up because we're flogging this to all and sundry. The stock of Citibank had got so expensive, like $600 a share. It was out of everyone's reach. So they split the price. They split the stock up 5 ways, so it was less than $200 a share. Then they'd talk these people into buying these stocks. Employees of National City Bank were encouraged to buy stocks. They'd be loaned money from the company. These are bank tellers on low incomes. They'd be loaned money from the company to buy their own shares they could pay back on instalment, and they'd have the repayments taken out of their wages. For someone on $175, they'd have $60 a month taken out of their wages, right? And even when later on after the crash, when the share price went from above $600 down to $25, these poor employees were still paying debts based on the $600 price. Right? And often when they'd finish paying them, because Citibank wanted the downsides, they'd wait till they'd finished, the employee had finished paying their debts, and then they'd sack them. Right? This is what was going on from 29 to 1933. National City Company would sell City's customers things like bonds in Brazilian state governments. Now, what the customers didn't know is the bonds they were buying were totally unreliable. The state governments had a reputation of defaulting, but they were by buying the bonds, they were putting up the money for that state government to repay loans to Citibank. Oh. Right? Just outright fraud like this. And this is what they'd got away with time after time after time. The chairman of the boss of the company, this guy Charlie Mitchell, he was the greatest banker in Wall Street. He earned, from 1927 to 29, he earned $3.5 million. Now, the author of this book says that's the equivalent of $500 million today. When the average person's salary was just next to nothing compared to that, right? It was enormous. He made a big show that when the crash happened, I stepped in to buy stock, and he did. He tried to shore up confidence in the company's stock. That's the things he did publicly. Privately, he was selling stock as well. And in fact, he went to jail because he was shown up that the crash happened in September 1929. In December 1929, he sold 18,000 shares in Citibank to his wife to record a $2.8 million loss for that year. So he had to pay no tax on this enormous income, and then in January he bought them back. So this is what Pecora drew this out in these hearings, right? Because he knew he had a sniff this was corrupt, and he made it come to the fore. These hearings, people used to listen to him on radio, and what it led to was all of a sudden Roosevelt, he changed his speech for his inauguration to, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself. The high priests of finance have fled the temple." That gave him his focus on clearing up Wall Street. We got the Glass-Steagall law out of it, and finally a proper way of putting these rabid junkyard dogs on the leash, and that's what saved America at that time.
And that's what we need again today. And in fact, people may not know, but the Pecora Commission had been going, I think you mentioned it, before Pecora came in. But the banks were untouchable until he came in. So it was one man who had the courage to do this, and one Wall Street banker offered him $1 million not to do it, to give it up, and he refused. And he knew almost nothing about banking when he began, but he learnt, he figured it out. Now, this is what you all need to do, so contact us. You can get a free copy of our EIR magazine.
Look for that book.
You can get the Australian Alert Service, and stay tuned again for next week's CEC Report.